He said that like a warning, and maybe it was. But the way her name sat on my tongue, quiet, dangerous, made me think crying would be the easiest part. I wasn't supposed to be there that late. The shop usually closed at 8, but the old espresso machine from the back room had stopped working again, and I was too proud to leave things half done. The rain had started a few hours earlier, tapping against the wide garage windows, smearing the reflection of fluorescent light across the glass. I liked nights like that, quiet, mechanical, full of small sounds that didn't ask for anything. Then she came in. The doorbell made that dull chime I'd been meaning to fix for months. I didn't turn around right away. Customers sometimes wandered in after hours, but her voice cut through the noise of the rain. Calm, low, the kind of voice that could make instructions sound like confessions. Sorry, I saw the light on. Didn't mean to interrupt. When I turned, she was standing half under the doorframe, coat damp at the shoulders, hair pulled back like she'd done it without a mirror. Maybe she'd been caught in the rain. Maybe she just didn't care. Either way, she looked too composed to belong in a place that smelled like motor oil and burnt coffee. I was passing by, she said, glancing at the old jukebox in the corner. Didn't know anyone still fixed these things. I told her I didn't, except when the owner asked nicely. That made her smile. Not the practiced kind. It was small, almost reluctant, like she'd forgotten how for a second. Her name was Elena. I learned that when she offered her hand, dry now, even though her coat was still wet. She said she owned the antique shop 2 blocks down, the one I always thought was closed because the windows were covered with dust and old lace curtains. You fix machines, she said, watching me wipe grease off my palms, and I fix people's memories. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and went back to the espresso machine. I could feel her behind me, not close enough to touch, but close enough that the air shifted. She didn't talk much after that, just wandered the shop, fingertips brushing over tools, shelves, and old radio. Every so often, I'd hear her hum quietly, something old-fashioned, like a song that didn't want to be remembered. At some point, she picked up a cracked mug from my workbench. The rim was chipped, and I told her not to use it, that I'd been meaning to throw it out. She turned it over in her hands, tracing the crack with her thumb. It's a good kind of broken, she said. The kind that still remembers being whole. I laughed, too quickly, too loud, and she looked at me, not judging, just waiting for me to quiet down. The rain outside grew heavier. We didn't talk much after that. She stood by the door, and I finished putting the machine back together. The smell of metal and coffee hung in the air between us. I didn't know how to say goodbye to someone I'd only just met but already didn't want to leave. When she finally spoke again, it was softer. You'll cry, she said, if you keep fixing things for people like me. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the word stuck. So I said the only thing that made sense to me in that moment, even if it didn't to her. Then I'll cry with your name on my lips. She didn't answer, just smiled that quiet, uncertain smile again, then left, her reflection vanishing into the glass, the door chime echoing too long. And even now, hours later, with the rain finally gone and the machine humming perfectly, I still catch myself looking at that cracked mug, wondering why her touch made it feel like the only thing in the room still alive. She came back 3 days later. I told myself it was coincidence, that she needed something fixed, that people like her didn't return, they passed through. This time, it wasn't raining. The sunlight slid across the floor of the repair shop, cutting through the dust in pale streaks. I was bent over a record player, pretending not to notice the shape of her shadow stretching long across the tiles until her voice broke the hum of the radio. Do you ever fix things that aren't broken? I looked up. She was holding an old camera, the kind that clicked like a heartbeat when it worked. She said it used to belong to her husband. Used to. She didn't look up when she said it. I just wanted to feel alive again, she murmured, setting it gently on the counter. Her eyes caught mine for a second, steady, then gone. There was something rehearsed in her calm, but her fingers betrayed her. They tightened slightly around the camera strap before letting go, like she didn't trust her own decision to leave it behind. I told her I could look at it right away. She smiled politely, said there was no rush. But she didn't leave either. Instead, she walked to the back of the shop, where the shelves leaned with the weight of half-fixed things. Your place smells like rain, she said after a while. I wanted to tell her it was just oil and metal, but the way she said it, soft, almost nostalgic, made me stay quiet. Maybe she needed the lie. I worked on the camera while she drifted around the room, fingertips grazing objects without purpose. I noticed small things about her. How she pushed her hair behind her ear every time she leaned closer. How she bit the inside of her cheek when she thought no one was looking. How her hands looked too delicate to have known the kind of loss her tone hinted at. At one point, she laughed, quietly, to herself. I didn't even catch the joke, but it hit me like a sound I'd been missing. The kind that makes silence feel too heavy afterward. What? I asked. Nothing, she said quickly. It's silly, but her voice wavered, and I could see her eyes glisten just a little too bright for someone laughing. She turned away fast, pretending to study an old jukebox that hadn't worked in years. I didn't move, didn't ask. I just let the air fill the space between us, the quiet hum of electricity somewhere above. After a long pause, she said, "You shouldn't look at people like that." Like what? Like you're waiting for them to break. She didn't wait for an answer, just gathered her coat and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she stopped, her hand resting on the frame. "Let me know when it works again," she said. I nodded, and after she left, I realized my fingers were still trembling from the way her voice had softened on that last word, again. Like she wasn't talking about the camera at all by the time she came for the camera. It was already dark. The rain had returned, soft at first, then relentless, as if the sky couldn't decide whether to whisper or scream. I'd stayed late, knowing she'd said she'd stop by after closing. She arrived wrapped in silence. Her coat dripped onto the floor, her hair damp at the ends. She didn't seem to notice. She just stood there, eyes scanning the room like she was remembering where everything belonged. "You fixed it," she said, spotting the camera on the counter. I nodded. It just needed a new shutter spring. She picked it up carefully, as if it might bruise. Then she aimed it at me, the old lens clicking in her hand. "Still sounds like him," she whispered, not realizing she'd said it out loud. I didn't ask who him was. I didn't need to. The way she looked at the camera told me everything. Someone loved through the lens, someone now gone. "Do you ever take pictures?" she asked suddenly, forcing brightness into her voice. "Not of people," I said. "Why not?" "Because people move," I said, half joking. "Machines don't." That made her smile, but her eyes softened in a way that made me wish I'd stayed quiet. The power flickered then, just long enough to pull the air tight between us. I moved toward the breaker box, but she stopped me. "Leave it," she said. "It's kind of nice like this." The lights settled into a dim hum, half the shop swallowed by shadow. She leaned against the counter, the camera resting in her palm. I could smell the faint trace of rain on her clothes, sharp, clean, and entirely out of place among the rust and dust. For a while, we didn't speak. The silence felt fragile, like one word too loud could break it. Then she asked, "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But then I'd miss what's broken." Her laugh was small, tired. "You're too young to talk like that." I wanted to tell her she didn't look her age when she laughed. I wanted to tell her that the way she stood, half turned away, but not enough to leave, felt like an invitation. But I didn't, because something about her made every honest thought feel like a line I shouldn't cross. A phone buzzed on the counter. She flinched. I saw the name flash on the screen. Daniel, before she turned it over, the vibration echoing in the silence. "Friend?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "Someone who used to wait for me to come home." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was weighing whether to trust the quiet between us. Her hand brushed the edge of the counter, then, just barely, touched mine. Accidental, maybe. Maybe not. Neither of us moved. The rain grew louder. Then, as if remembering herself, she pulled her hand back. "You should lock up," she said softly. She turned to leave, but halfway to the door, she stopped and looked over her shoulder. "You look at people like you're trying to fix what you didn't break," she said. And before I could answer, she was gone again, her silhouette dissolving into the rain, leaving me standing there with her warmth still lingering on my skin and a question I didn't dare ask. She stopped coming for a week. I told myself I didn't notice. That the shop was quieter, yes, but in a good way, less distraction, fewer strange silences hanging between words. But every time the doorbell didn't ring, it felt like someone was holding a pause too long, waiting for a reply that would never come. Then, one evening, she appeared again. No rain this time, no pretext. Just her, standing in the doorway like she wasn't sure if she should be there. I was nearby, she said. The lights were on. They weren't. I turned them on when I saw her walking past. She sat on the stool near the counter, elbows resting on her knees. She looked different, tired in the eyes, like something had been weighing her down all week. I poured her a cup of the burnt coffee I always kept around for myself. She didn't even flinch at the taste. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. Finally, she said, "He came by." I didn't ask who. There was only one he in her pauses. He wanted to talk. About selling the house. About everything. Her voice cracked halfway through, and she looked away. It's strange how people can still want something from you after they've already taken everything. I didn't know what to do with my hands, so I started cleaning a wrench that didn't need cleaning. She noticed. "You don't have to pretend you don't understand," she said softly. I set the wrench down. "Maybe I don't," I said, though my chest ached in a way that told me I did. She gave a half smile, bitter, almost apologetic. "You do. You just don't want to." Her eyes found mine then, steady but trembling at the edges. Something in them had changed, less guarded, more raw. Like she was done pretending she didn't know what this was becoming. "Elena," I started but stopped. Because what was I supposed to say? That I thought about her voice when the shop went quiet? That I'd started keeping an extra mug just in case she came back? "What are we doing?" she asked suddenly. Her words came out small, but they hit hard, like she'd been holding them in her throat for too long. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The truth was, I didn't know. We weren't friends, not really. We weren't anything I could name without ruining it. We existed somewhere between comfort and confession, in a place too fragile for either. She leaned forward slightly, her hand hovering in the air like she wanted to reach for something. Maybe the mug, maybe me, but stopped halfway. "You remind me of a promise I broke a long time ago," she said quietly. Then she smiled, a sad, uneven smile, and stood up. "That's not fair to you." Before I could move, she was already walking toward the door. "Wait," I said, but the word came out too late, too soft. She paused with her hand on the handle, her back to me. For a moment, I thought she'd turn around. Instead, she whispered, "It's worse, isn't it, when silence starts saying everything you're afraid to?" And then she was gone again, leaving the door slightly open, the sound of her voice still echoing in the space where she should have been. She returned on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that sits between hours and doesn't belong anywhere. I was under the hood of an old Vespa when I heard her voice. "You never called." It wasn't an accusation, but it wasn't neutral either. I straightened up, wiping grease from my fingers. She was holding something, a small envelope, worn at the edges. Her hair was tied up this time, but a few strands had fallen loose, framing her face like she'd run her hands through it too many times before coming here. "I didn't know I was supposed to," I said carefully. Her eyes softened for a second. "You weren't." She placed the envelope on the counter and slid it toward me. "I found this in the camera. It must have been stuck behind the film compartment." Inside was a photograph, faded, washed with years. A man stood beside her, arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling at something outside the frame. The same camera hung around his neck. "He took that a week before he died," she said quietly. "Car accident. 3 years ago." I stared at the photo, unsure whether to offer sympathy or silence. She chose for me. "I used to think that camera was cursed," she went on. "Every time I held it, I felt like I was borrowing something that didn't belong to me anymore." Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, though her voice stayed calm. Too calm, like she'd practiced this for a long time. "I wasn't supposed to bring it to you," she said. I wanted to see if someone else could make it work again. I thought maybe if it clicked, if I heard that sound one more time, I'd stop seeing his face every time I closed my eyes." The shop felt smaller suddenly, like her confession had pulled the walls closer. I didn't know where to look, so I looked at her hands. She kept rubbing her thumb over the edge of the counter, wearing down the invisible grain. You remind me of him, she said then. I froze. Not the way you look, she added. The way you listen. He used to listen like that, as if silence was something you could hold without breaking it. There was no accusation in her voice, but something inside me shifted, like a floorboard giving way. I didn't want to be a ghost's echo. I didn't want to be someone she saw through someone else's shadow. Elena, I said softly. She looked up. Her eyes were wet, but steady. I know, she whispered. It's unfair. Neither of us moved. The photograph sat between us, face up, two people smiling, one gone, one still haunted. Do you ever stop feeling guilty for surviving someone? She asked. I didn't answer, because I didn't know if she was asking me, or him. A drop of oil slipped from the Vespa's pipe and hit the floor, a single sound, sharp in the silence. She reached out, brushed her fingers against mine, not affection, not need, just presence. Thank you, she said, voice trembling, for fixing what still hurts. Then she turned and left, leaving the photo behind. When the door closed, I looked down at the picture again. Her smile, his hand, the faint outline of the same cracked mug sitting on a counter behind them. And for the first time, I realized I'd been part of her story long before she ever walked into mine. She didn't come back the next day, or the one after. But the photos stayed, her ghost and his, smiling up from the counter, refusing to fade. A week passed before I saw her again. No pretext this time. No broken object, no half excuse about being nearby. Just her, standing outside while the light rain turned the world into watercolor. I opened the door before she could knock. You forgot something, I said, holding up the photo. Her eyes dropped to it. No, she whispered. You needed it more than I did. We stood there, me in the doorway, her in the rain, neither stepping forward. The quiet between us wasn't sharp anymore. It was soft, worn, familiar. Finally, I moved aside, and she came in. She shook the rain from her coat, glanced around the shop like she was returning to a place she'd once lived in. You fixed the Vespa, she said. I nodded. It runs smoother now. Doesn't stall when it rains. She smiled faintly. Wish people worked that way. For a long time, that was all. Two people pretending to talk about engines. Then she said, almost to herself, I thought grief would make me smaller, but it just made me quieter. I didn't answer. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't sound like trying to fix her again. She sat on the stool she always chose, elbows on her knees, looking down. I kept hearing his voice every time the camera clicked. And now, when I think of that sound, it's yours. I didn't move closer, but something inside me did. Elena, I said quietly, you don't have to replace him with me. Her eyes lifted, wet but steady. I'm not trying to, she said. I'm just remembering what it felt like to still feel. The words landed between us like something fragile but true. The rain outside softened. I poured her a cup of coffee, still burnt, still awful. She smiled and took it anyway. The kind of smile that didn't ask for more. I don't know where this goes, I admitted. Or if it should. Then don't name it, she said. Just let it breathe. She reached out then, slow, uncertain, and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was cold from the rain, but it warmed fast. We didn't look at each other. Didn't need to. The air shifted again, like it had that first night. Only this time there was no tension, just quiet understanding. Minutes passed before she spoke again. Do you ever think maybe we meet people not to start over, but to stop running? I looked at her, and for once, she didn't look away. The clock ticked, steady and merciful. The rain thinned into mist. Her thumb brushed the back of my hand, a small, grounding gesture. I think, I said finally, this is enough. She nodded, eyes soft. Yes, for now it is. We sat there, side by side, no words left to mend or break. The photos still on the counter between us, 2 lives from before, and 2 new ones quietly learning how to breathe in the same room. And when she leaned her forehead against my shoulder, just for a moment, just enough to be real, I didn't move. Because some endings don't close. They just exhale. It's been months now. The mug still sits on the counter, cracked but whole enough to hold coffee. Hers, mostly. She still drops by. Not every day, not even every week. Just enough that I never stop expecting her. Things are quieter between us now, but not in that uncertain way they used to be. The silence doesn't press anymore, it breathes. Sometimes she brings old things from her shop. A typewriter that sticks, a lamp that flickers, a clock that runs 5 minutes late. She doesn't ask me to fix them right away. She just leaves them here, like she's giving me a reason to stay still. She laughs more now. It's a different laugh, not the brittle kind that hides something, but the kind that leaves echoes in the air long after she's gone. And me, I've stopped counting days by what's broken. I still fix things, but I don't stay after hours anymore. Not unless the light outside turns gold and I can see her reflection through the window across the street. We never talked about that night. Or about love. We don't need to. What happened between us never belonged to the kind of world that names things. It's quieter than that, like the hum of a machine that finally runs right after years of noise. Sometimes, when I catch her watching me, I think about the first time she stood in that doorway, all rain and restraint, and how I couldn't tell what she was looking for. I don't think she knew either. Now, I think we both do. She doesn't talk about her husband much anymore, though his photo still lives in her shop window, right beside a vase of fresh flowers she changes every week. Once, she told me she used to feel guilty for being alive when he wasn't. Now, she just says, some things don't heal, they just learn to live differently. And maybe that's what this is. Not a romance. Not a new beginning. Just two people who stopped pretending to be fine, long enough to realize they already were. She asked me once, quietly, if I still thought I'd cry for her someday. I told her maybe, but not out of sadness. More like gratitude. For the way she turned a place filled with broken things into something worth staying in. The other day, she handed me a photo, one she'd taken with that old camera. It was of the shop, light spilling through the window, the dust glowing like it had something to say. She'd written one line on the back, "You fixed it." I didn't ask what she meant, the camera, the shop, or herself. I think she meant all of it. Now, sometimes, I stand by the window at closing time, the hum of the lights fading, the air soft with that familiar stillness. And if I listen closely, I swear I can still hear her say, "It's enough." Maybe that's the real story. Not who we were, but who we allowed each other to become. If you've ever met someone who quietly changed the way you breathe, without ever meaning to, you'll understand. Tell me, have you?